There's no feeling more intense than starting over. If you've broken your Scratch project moments after you've shared it. Alright, thanks for coming with me on this trip. I'll understand if you need to take a break at any point. Just find a safe place to stop and remember to pause the game by pressing P. On Scratch you can find loads of remixed or reimagined recreations of existing games, and with good reason. George Bernard Shaw said, imitation titled Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy. That game in turn was a homage to a free game that came out in 2002. Both games involved dragging yourself, using a hammer, up a mountain assembled from assets and objects sourced from many other. Unity or Unreal, Scratch does not provide you with a built-in physics or 3D rendering engine. It has no state-of-the-art debugger, you can't even pause your scripts. We are forced to program old school. Our experience capped at 30 frames per second on a 480 by 360 pixel stage. But these very restrictions force us to experiment, to think out of the box, to grow as developers as we become masters of all things Scratch. And let's not forget, what we lack in technology, we make up for in community. This fantastic bunch of budding software The act of climbing, in the digital world or in the real world, has certain essential properties that give the game its flavour. No amount of forward progress is guaranteed. Brush yourself off. Back up you go. Gosh, here we are again. It always seems impossible. At this point, you don't want to fall into the trap of rushing into creating loads of content, designing all the levels, the player costumes, all the easier stuff that can be perfected later. No, before all that, you need to prod and poke that tree. That is, understand any ideas to solve them. You may not be able to time travel, but at least this way you can get a good idea of how well your project is likely to go, and potentially save yourself a lot of time. This project began life a couple of months ago as 3 simple scripts: the player, hammer, and level. I spent no time on the art, just using Scratchcat and a few rectangles drawn in the sprite editor. The scripts for the player quickly mocked up in a similar fashion to those I teach on my YouTube channel. With the hammer I had to improvise because I'd never done anything quite like that before, and boy did I prod and poke at those scripts. What I had imagined and the results I was achieving were hard to reconcile. The hammer and the player sprites would get stuck in the wall when I tried the bread and butter action of lifting the player up upon the hammer. Any tiny movement would throw the player into a crazy up and down motion as if bouncing upon a possessed pogo stick. Things don't always turn out as you want them to, and sometimes it's good to take a break. So, have you, as you've been playing this game, stopped to wonder how you can balance on? No, this game is bending the rules of physics. Although I was not actively working on the project, the desire to code the game and solve the initial problems constantly played on my mind. Finally, I decided to give it another go.
Oh. What? 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 There's no feeling more intense than starting over. If you deleted your homework the day before it was due, as I have, or if you left your wallet at home and you have to go back after spending an hour in the commute. If you won some money at the casino and then put all your winnings on red but it came up black. If you got your best shirt dry cleaned before a wedding and then immediately dropped food on it. If you won an argument with a friend and then later discovered that they just returned to their original view. Starting over is harder than starting up. If you're not ready for that, like if you've already had a bad day, then what you're about to... This game is a homage to a free game that came out in 2002 titled Sexy Hiking. The author of that game was Jazuo, a mysterious Czech designer who was known at the time as the father of B games. And B games are rough assemblages of found objects. Designers slap them together very quickly and freely, and they're often too rough and unfriendly to gain much of a following. They're built more for the joy of building them than as polished products. In a certain way, Sexy Hiking is the perfect embodiment of a B game. It's built almost entirely out of essential properties that give the game its flavor. No amount of forward progress is guaranteed. Some cliffs are too sheer or too slippery, and the player is constantly, unremittingly in danger of falling and losing everything. Anyway, when you start Sexy Hiking, you're standing next to this dead tree that blocks the way to the entire rest of the game. It might take you an hour to get over that tree, and a lot of people never got past it. You prod and you poke at it, exploring the limits of your reach and your strength, trying to find a way up and over. And there's a sense of truth in that lack of compromise. Most obstacles in video game worlds are fake. You can be completely confident in your ability to get through them once you have the correct method or the correct equipment or just by spending enough time. In that sense, every pixelated obstacle in Sexy Hiking is real. And I'd build it, test it, and it would usually turn out to be unreasonably hard. But I couldn't bring myself to make it easier. It already felt like my inability to get past the new obstacle was my fault as a player rather than as a builder. Imaginary mountains build themselves from our efforts to climb them, and it's our repeated attempts to reach the summit that turns those mountains into something real. When you're building a video game world, you're building with ideas, and that can be like working with quickset cement. You mold your ideas into a certain shape that can be played with, and in the process of playing with them, they begin to harden and set until they're immutable, like rock. And at that point, you can't change the world. Not without breaking it into pieces and starting fresh with new ideas. For years now, people have been predicting that games would soon be made out of prefabricated objects, bought in a store and assembled into a world. And for the most part, that hasn't happened, because the objects in the stores are trash. I don't mean they look bad or that they're badly made, although a lot of them are. I mean they're trash in the way that food becomes trash as soon as you put it in the sink. Things are made to be consumed in a certain context, and once the moment is gone, they transform into garbage. In the context of technology, those moments pass by in seconds. Over time, we've poured more and more refuse into this vast to build culture out of trash. But only trash culture. B games, B movies, B music, B philosophy. Maybe this is what digital culture is. A monstrous mountain of trash, the ash heap of creativity's fountain. A landfill with everything we ever thought of in it. Grand, infinite, and unsorted. In this context, it's tempting to make friendly content that's gentle, that lets you churn through it but not earn it. Why make something demanding if it just gets piled up in the landfill, filed in with the bland things? When games were new, they wanted a lot from you. Like a baby bird being fed chewed up food. That's culture too. We have the same taste, you and I. It's not ambition, it's ambition's opposite. An obdurate mission to taste defeat. You'll feel bad if you win, so I put this snake in for you. Have you thought about who you are in this? Are you the man in the pot, Diogenes? Are you his hand? Are you the top of his hammer? I think not. Where your hand moves, the hammer may not follow, nor the
There's no feeling more intense than starting over. If you've broken your Scratch project moments after you've shared it, as I have, or you spent hours working on a project only to notice too late that one of your sprites has unexplainably gone missing. If you've made use of that difficult-to-name thing of thing block within the sensing category, amazingly useful but capable due to a Scratch bug of leaving you crying as it dumps all your scripts in one big unordered heap. If you've made real progress coding a game over the course of the week, only to come back the next day to discover you weren't even logged in, nothing has been saving. Starting over is harder than starting up. If you're not ready by pressing P. On Scratch you can find loads of remixed or reimagined recreations of existing games, and with good reason. George Bernard Shaw said, "Imitation is not just the sincerest form of flattery. It's the sincerest form of learning." This game is a recreation of a game that came out in 2017, titled Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy. That game in turn was a homage to a free game that came out in 2002. Both games involved dragging yourself, using a hammer, up a mountain assembled from assets and objects sourced from many other games. It seems appropriate then that, when trying to recreate Getting Over It in Scratch, that we should construct our mountain from the same assets used in literally millions of Scratch projects, 30 frames per second on a 480 by 360 pixel stage. But these very restrictions force us to experiment, to think out of the box, to grow as developers as we become masters of all things Scratch. And let's not forget, what we lack in technology, we make up for in community. This fantastic bunch of budding software engineers, building, learning, creating, playing, remixing, as diverse a group of people as the very Scratch assets we now so skillfully attempt to ascend. The act of climbing, in the digital world or in the real world, has certain essential properties that give the game its flavour. No amount of forward progress is guaranteed. When you start Getting Over It, you're standing next to a dead tree, which blocks the way to the entire rest of the game. You prod and poke at it, exploring the limits of your reach and strength, trying to find a way of finished, unseen projects that haunt the vast storage archives of MIT. Have you, as you've been playing this game, stopped to wonder how you can balance on a hammer that is held out to one side? It feels quite natural in game, but try it in the real world, and you'll not get your feet off the ground. No, this game is bending the rules of physics, Oh, gosh, here we are again. Research is a powerful tool. Don't just rely on what you think you know. YouTube can be a great resource for gameplay videos. Being able to pause and rewind the action is invaluable. Did you know that you can step through videos frame by frame using the angled bracket keys? My research helped confirm many thoughts I'd been having, and also uncovered some nuances around mouse movement that had really got me stumped. All this was food for my brain, and I was super fired up to bring it all to scratch. And so, back in Scratch, I completely restructured the player and hammer scripts, bringing the scripts together in a single sprite. This allowed the movement of the two objects to be tracked together and to move dependent on each other. Of course, in coding, as in real life, you often have to compromise. It isn't reasonable to implement of what the player is expecting. 1 + 1 is 2. If this wasn't always the case, if sometimes the answer was 3, then we would be in trouble. The addition operator is therefore referred to as deterministic. Similarly in Scratch, if your player sprite reports that it isn't touching the level, then you would expect, assuming the player is not moved relative to the level, that this would continue to be the case. As it turns out, the sensing block in Scratch does not behave like this. It can be non-deterministic. This is down to how Scratch draws its sprites. Their size and shape can change very slightly by where the sprite no longer reports. It always seems impossible. Until, that is,